Hey everybody, Fan1309 here, and welcome back to my State of Destiny 2 series. Today we've got my final thoughts on Season of the Witch, a quick introduction to Season of the Wish, and some final thoughts for the video. This one shouldn't be too long for the series, so let's go ahead and jump right in. So we'll start with the Season 22 final thoughts. In my previous video, I mentioned how my declining playtime led to most of my low scores for Season of the Deep, and I'm going to preface in the manner that the exact same scoring situation is being used here. So, recapping and rating, we'll start with the story, and I will rate 7 out of 10 for Season of the Witch. The story followed a bit better compared to the previous two seasons of the year. Bungie leaned in on the character that gave them so much success with the Witch Queen in Savathun, and once again, Savathun kind of took the cake and ran with it, even if only for a few critical moments. The first half of the season had us power up Eris to cut off Xivu's connection to her throne world, which had us using Hive magic to do so. Eventually, Eris combined that with Savathun's own power to drive out Xivu and push her to the side for now. In the second half of the season, we explored deeper parts of the throne world in search of Savathun's way through the Witness's portal, and it was determined to be an Ahamkara egg and the apparent last wish, the 15th wish. Story-wise, the story was really good, albeit there were a couple of parts of the season that were pushed to seasonal lore cards that I was a bit disappointed didn't make the actual cutscenes in the season. Activities were pretty fine as well, but once again, were held back by the glaring gameplay issues that have been plaguing this game all year. Moving on to endgame, it's the same score as last season with a 2 out of 10. There haven't been any changes made to what happened in Deep, and in a way, Bungie doubled down with the Crota contest mode. Instead of realizing that level capping 80 to 90% of the game has been driving people away from the game, Bungie instead pushed the dials up even higher with Crota, which led to one of the most uninventive raid experiences I have ever seen. Debate me on this all you want, but going even further on damage check fights does not denote good encounter design to me. As for the rest, the entire endgame is still just been relegated to a checklist. It's one and done on everything. There is no reason to do anything after you get one completion because things are just far too tedious. Grandmasters really pushed Battlegrounds too much to the forefront in my opinion. Although Moon and Europa were perfectly fine as Grandmasters, the experience is just no longer as interesting as it was before, and I really think that Battlegrounds have already outstayed their welcome in the Vanguard playlist. For the grind, I'm rating 6 out of 10. Nothing really changed, but I'm knocking off a point because there was no acknowledgement of the harmonizer issue from last season. You still only get 6 per season, and 3 if you don't buy the pass. I will give Bungie props for making Necrochasm a quest-based exotic and not RNG completely. And even more so, the fact that it was not on a weekly lockout was a good thing that did allow people who wanted to farm for the weapon to actually do so. In terms of exotics, I do rate 7 out of 10 here. The 2 new weapons, well, 1 new and 1 reprised. The new weapon was Exteris. It put a Hive Boomer in her hands for the first time and also gave it Lucent Mouth effects for a double dose of a new enemy weapon making its hands into the player's arsenal. Nothing but good things here, Bungie. Anytime you add an enemy weapon to the game as an exotic, I'm all over that kind of thing, and I was very satisfied to see it. Lots of fun. Enjoyed the weapon a lot. Please do more of that. Necrochasm came back from Crota, although it has lost out on all of the kills trigger explosion effects on all kills. It's now back to precisions. The secondary poison to explode benefit, in my personal opinion, does justify the change back to precision kills. It's still just as fun to use, although Outlaw was a very odd choice for a catalyst in my opinion. This is apparently going to be changing in the final shape to something new. As mentioned in my initial impressions video, the 3 exotic armor pieces were all very good, and I do hope that this is the trend that continues going forward. Gameplay-wise, just like endgame, same problems from Season of the Deep, so also back to 2 out of 10. I cannot rate any higher than 2 out of 10 until you sort this difficulty nightmare that you've added to the game. Having over 80% of the game invalidate one of the key components of an RPG style game basically means we're no longer playing an RPG style game, we're just playing a glorified space Call of Duty with stat sheets tacked on. Compounding this was one of the issues I talked about in my previous video, how there are just so many issues with some of the subclasses, mainly Warlock subclasses right now, and it just takes Bungie's teams far too long to get in there and make any kind of meaningful adjustments to move the needle back in the right direction. I've mentioned with Strand already, I'm done writing about this already. The entire Warlock kit needs to be redone. None of the aspects offer anything that feel meaningful and exciting to use. So neither the Wanderer or Weavewalk added anything fun to the kit. Both of those need to be completely reworked or completely overhauled at this point. Festival of the Lost, 3 out of 10. Basically another copy paste, same old length based objective with all of these events, only this time was ritual playlist instead of Crucible. So thankfully it wasn't a blunder of 25 Crucible matches like we had in Solstice, but still having to play all of those ritual activities that late in the season was not an enjoyable experience. Legend Haunted Sectors, that was a complete and utter failure in my opinion. It basically just highlighted the difficulty problem on an even grander scale. And it also served as an excellent reminder to why having things that are legend difficulty or higher, having matchmaking is also a terrible idea. Eerie Engrams and Lost Mementos were an interesting concept, but the thing is, it's another example of Bungie doing 1 foot forward, 2 steps back. We've been asking for new mementos for a very long time, and now we finally get them in a time-limited event. So, yeah, that was not good. The focusing things, that was all right, though. Also, Festival of Lost just demonstrated class balance bias to full effect again with just how broken Banner of War was. But sure, I guess according to Joe Blackburn, it's fine. So I guess nothing's going to happen on that front. And as for the rest, it's still a glorified microtransaction push. So no candy on the score for you, Bungie. You're just going to continue to push Eververse. So all in all, I'm going to score this season 4 out of 10. I'm just going to note right away, there is a very large asterisk on this score. Season of the Witch had all the writing on the wall to be an amazing season. But once again, it ends up with the same score as Deep in my books. The World Systems team needs a reality check at this point. They have caused so much damage to this game. There were so many great quality of life adjustments, really good sandbox for the season as well. And it could have easily have been one of my top rated seasons on my scale. World Systems teams, they need to suck up their egos, undo the damage they caused in Lightfall with level deltas and everything. It's done. Just do away with it. So let's talk quickly about season 23. I'm not going to do a full batch of initial impressions, just some key points for the first week. I did have a little bit of a blurb on the whole starter pack fiasco, but since Bungie has already pulled it from the store, I don't really need to say anything about that. Story and lore-wise, things do look to be on a good track. Seasonal storylines have been slowly improving, so I do hope that the final entry to the seasonal model does well. The one positive change was bringing back the upgrade system from Season of the Deep. That's one thing I did appreciate from Season of the Deep, is having upgrades that were not time-locked or time-gated, so that's a good change I'm happy to see back in place. Sandbox-wise, I feel like the ability cooldown changes were the wrong approach to the problem. I think if Bungie really wants to rein in ability spam, then you just need to tune down the damage that the abilities are doing. You don't need to neuter the entire notion of using space magic in a game that's supposed to be about space magic. Also, stasis buffs, are you sure? It didn't feel like anything meaningful happened to stasis at all. Adding on to that, the artifact mods did not really impress me either, and given the fact that this is supposed to be a 7-month season, I really was disappointed in that. The seasonal activity was one of the strongest entries yet, with some very good potential in the coil especially. It seems like the lessons learned from Season of the Deep were put to good use here, so we'll see how that goes. In my personal opinion, level deltas on an activity like the coil is one of the few places in the game where I feel like it makes sense. Like Grandmaster Nightfalls, Legend Campaign, and things like the coil actually makes sense to have level deltas because they are supposed to be that way. Everything else, no. So building on that same feedback point, I was not a fan of putting deltas on even more activities in the game with Blindwell. Blindwell needed a refresh, but it needed to be done the right way. That means new encounters, increasing the ad density, not throwing more deltas onto the activity. It seems like you've completely ignored the events of this year and how a large audience of players have been extremely dissatisfied with level deltas. New dungeon was very enjoyable. It feels a lot more reasonable in terms of the length to difficulty ratio compared to Ghost of the Deep, although the bosses still do feel a bit too beefy in my opinion. Also, there was kind of a strange thing where it seems like that old double to triple damage bug from the Witch Queen was back. Certain enemy projectiles were sometimes doing like twice or 3 times as the intended damage, so please look into that. Also, the loot from the dungeon is very forgettable. None of the weapons other than the new rocket sidearm have any kind of interesting perk combinations, and the armor, well, it's still armor, so it doesn't really matter all that much. So we'll see what happens with the season, but that's about all I can give on it for right now. So where do we go from here? Well, this is a 7-month season to Destiny 2, meaning it will be the longest season the game goes through. I feel like this will really only go one of 2 ways. First, the seasonal burnout hits really quickly, and Bungie just has to end up slow burning the game to the final shape and then try to scrounge what players they have left. The other thing is that Bungie starts to recognize the flaws that they introduced in Lightfall and starts to make reversions, allowing the mid-game and in-game to come back and, in that case, hold on to and maybe even get players back into the game. Bungie has seemed to be a little more communicative as of recently, and this is something that the developers really need to do a lot more often. I feel like so many of the problems in the game could have been avoided if the community team was more interactive with the community and the developers were much more reactive to the feedback that was given. Unfortunately, I do feel like the ship has sailed as it pertains to getting Destiny back on track. While a 3-month delay to the final shape might help polish up some of the features and maybe even bring forward something that was planned for episode 2, I don't really see this helping the game given Bungie's stubbornness to undo the damage caused by Lightfall. The vocal aspect of the community seems to be ruptured along hard lines pertaining to the difficulty changes and PvP. Unfortunately, this means that no middle ground solutions are ever found. As it stands, the more hardcore audience is getting their way with the PvE game, since level deltas are now on like 85% of the game, and hardcore PvP audiences are getting their way with things like checkmate and no changes to the trials paradigm. In turn, the more casual-minded audience is essentially being locked out of a large portion of the game due to skill thresholds, something that used to be overcomable by the level progression in the game. Now, that's not to say that Bungie wasn't trying. There were points to be made on both sides of the argument, but what we have now is yet another case of Bungie leaning on the tail end of the spectrum instead of trying to solve problems with the middle ground solution or looking into what actually caused the problems in the first place. Massive Entertainment, the studio behind The Division, had a very similar problem when they launched the Underground update. That was update 1.3 to that game. Enemies were beyond tanky and lethal to no degree. You can go ask any Division 1 veteran about LMB shotgunners and they'll have a PTSD event. It took Massive 9 months and 2 major game updates to fully revert their difficulty changes to the game. But when they actually finally got around to doing it, the game ended up being in a much better place. Unfortunately, the difference here is that I think that Bungie actually believes that these difficulty changes have been a good thing for the game, even though they are at some of their lowest player engagement metrics and lowest player sentiment numbers that the game has seen. Instead of passionate developers looking to solve problems, I just see stubbornness and egos of these same developers. I'm probably going to be playing these next 7 months of Destiny 2 very lightly and keeping a lookout for any news on the front of finally understanding that these are issues with the game and maybe fixing it. But I don't really have hopes that this is going to happen anymore. So at this current juncture, I will be ending my 9-year tenure with Destiny at the end of this season. Bungie no longer has my trust as a developer anymore. They don't seem to have the community at large's best interest in mind, only worrying instead about a very small upper echelon of players who just want the game to be devolved into Dark Souls or Elden Ring. Most of my friends and clanmates quit back in defiance. They cited the level deltas as their primary reason for quitting. They only sign in anymore maybe once or twice to play one or two new pieces of content, and then they don't play the game again for very long periods of time. It's no longer sustainable. It's no longer fun. It has just become far too tedious. It's basically the Division 1.3. So, unless Bungie is willing to have that intervention moment where they realize that these have been mistakes and start reverting the problems, then there's not really anything else for me to say. I've stuck around long enough. I've been preaching on these problems for far too long, but even I have a breaking point and it has been met. So, there's my thoughts on where things stand right now. There's not really much more to say about anything on that front. Bungie has challenged or brought the challenge back to Destiny out most of my friends from the game, and on that front, they've lost their trust and now have lost my trust as well. Continued stubbornness of Bungie to recognize this as a problem and revert accordingly has pushed many to their breaking points. I'm disappointed for sure. It's something I was really hoping to continue along, finish this 10-year journey, maybe see where things go afterwards, but this entire year has just been a continual decline of the overall player experience as a whole. And the end game has just been checklisted to the point where nobody wants to do high-level content outside of Grandmasters anymore. And with that, my own personal fun with the game is gone. People have always said there was going to be a Destiny killer one day, but the truth is the only thing that was ever going to kill Destiny was Destiny. So, my notion to those who are still playing the game is best of luck to you if you're planning on sticking around. If you like the game for what it is, then good on you. That should be the only driving factor if you want to play a game or not. I'm still going to be around. I'll check in now and then to see how things move with the game, but I'm going to be winding down my Destiny-related interactions, barring any major shifts. As for what's next here on the channel, I do have a best of the year video coming up later this month. A lot of funny moments on there, including a bunch of unpublished content from other games I've played this year. I will have a pretty quiet period to open up 2024 as I wrap up my PhD work, but once I finally get all that done, then I'll probably start activating my channel a bit more here again. So that's all I've got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see everyone next time.